Michael Jackson was the most famous artist on the planet. He broke records, redefined pop music, and became a global icon. But in 1993, an accusation changed everything. This isn't a story about albums or choreography. It's the story of the accusations that haunted Michael Jackson for the rest of his life, and that continue to divide the world to this day. Michael Jackson, innocent or guilty? One of the world's most well-known artists. He broke countless records and won an endless list of awards for his impact on world music. Michael Jackson. But it's impossible to think of the king of pop without remembering the many controversies that surrounded his life. And among them all, one stands out, even after his death. The accusations involving the sexual abuse of minors. Hello, my friends. How are you? Welcome to the best true crime channel, Real Stories in Dark Art. Today on the Illustrated Evil channel, we're going to talk about Michael Jackson. But today, we're not going to tell his life story, nor talk about his albums or his career. This video deals with all the sexual abuse allegations that Michael Jackson faced throughout his life. The goal here is not to convince you of his innocence, nor to affirm his guilt. The goal is to understand what really happened in each of these cases. We will analyze the accusations, the defenses, the evidence, the investigations, and the contradictions, and, whenever possible, separate the facts from the speculations. To understand the impact of these accusations, it's important to understand who Michael Jackson was at that moment in history. From a very young age, he had already become a star. First with his brothers in the Jackson 5, and later as a solo artist, Michael Jackson reached a level of fame that very few people in history have ever experienced. During the 1980s, it was impossible to escape his presence. His music was everywhere. His image was everywhere. His name was everywhere. Michael Jackson was not just a singer. He was a global phenomenon. And that level of fame plays a crucial role in everything that would happen from that point on. And it was within that context that the first major accusation emerged. In 1993, Michael Jackson was accused of sexually abusing a boy named Jordan Chandler. At the time, Jordan was 12 years old. Michael Jackson had met Jordan and his family earlier that year, and over time, he developed a close relationship with the boy. Jordan began spending long periods of time with Michael, including visits to Neverland Ranch. It is important to say this clearly. Michael Jackson admitted that he allowed children to sleep in his bedroom. He claimed there was nothing sexual about it. According to him, it was an act of innocence, the same kind of behavior he said he experienced in his own childhood. But in the case of Jordan Chandler, that relationship would soon become the center of a criminal investigation. The accusation was formally brought forward by Jordan's father, Evan Chandler. He claimed that his son had confessed to being abused by Michael Jackson. From that moment on, the case escalated quickly. Police opened a criminal investigation in Los Angeles, and the media immediately turned the story into headline news. Neverland Ranch was searched by authorities, and investigators began interviewing dozens of children who had visited the property. At the same time, the defense presented a different narrative. Michael Jackson's legal team argued that the accusation was part of an attempt at extortion. According to them, Evan Chandler had been negotiating large sums of money in exchange for silence, with demands that reached tens of millions of dollars. What began as a private family issue had now become one of the biggest scandals in the world. Despite the intensity of the investigation, no physical evidence was ever found. Dozens of children who had spent time at Neverland were interviewed by police. None of them reported having been abused by Michael Jackson. Even so, the case continued to grow. Michael Jackson was subjected to a strip search as part of the investigation in an attempt to verify descriptions reportedly given by Jordan Chandler. The results of that examination were never enough to move the case forward criminally. As months went by, the situation became increasingly complicated, not only legally, but also emotionally and physically for Michael Jackson. Under enormous pressure, his health began to deteriorate. Michael Jackson had been using prescription painkillers since the 1980s after suffering severe burns to his scalp while filming a Pepsi commercial. With the pressure of the case, his dependence on medication intensified. Because of his physical and emotional condition, Michael Jackson ended up canceling the final leg of the Dangerous tour. His own legal team believed he would not be able to withstand a long and exhausting court battle at that moment. As a result, on January 25, 1994, a civil settlement was reached. Michael Jackson agreed to pay $15 million into a fund for Jordan Chandler. He also paid $1.5 million to each of Jordan's parents and another $5 million to the family's attorneys. In total, the settlement amounted to $23 million. Many people believe that Michael Jackson was never tried because of that settlement. But that is not true. The agreement only resolved the civil lawsuit. The criminal case was completely separate and depended solely on the police investigation, and that investigation continued as usual. Michael Jackson could still have been formally charged and faced a criminal trial. That did not happen because, after months of investigation, authorities stated that there was not enough evidence to charge him. The situation became even more complicated in July of 1994, when the Chandler family stopped cooperating with the investigation. Investigators reportedly identified 2 additional potential victims, but they were also unwilling to testify. Without those testimonies, especially Jordan Chandler's, there was no criminal case to pursue. In fact, in 1993, Michael Jackson was never even formally charged, and that had nothing to do with the civil settlement. The aftermath of the case had lasting consequences for everyone involved. Jordan Chandler eventually emancipated himself from his parents, cutting legal ties with them. Years later, his father, Evan Chandler, would openly express regret over how the situation unfolded. In 2009, Evan Chandler was found dead after apparently taking his own life. As for Jordan himself, he has kept a very low profile ever since. At no point in his adult life has he repeated the accusations publicly, and he has avoided interviews almost entirely. Whether because of trauma, pressure, or a desire for privacy, Jordan Chandler chose to disappear from public view. And with the criminal case closed, the story seemed, for a long time, to be over. But while many people believed the case had ended there, that was not entirely true. During the same investigation in 1993, authorities also looked into other possible allegations. One of them involved a boy named Jason Francia. Jason was the son of Blanca Francia, a former employee who worked at Neverland Ranch. At the time, Jason Francia was 13 years old. What began as a background inquiry would later become one of the most controversial side stories of that period. Jason Francia was one of the children questioned during the 1993 investigation. At first, he stated that Michael Jackson had never abused him. He said the singer had only tickled him as part of playful behavior, and that nothing inappropriate had ever happened. However, investigators continued to question the boy over time. According to later statements, the pressure during those interviews caused Jason to change his story. In that new version, he claimed that Michael Jackson had touched him improperly on 3 occasions while tickling him, and that in one of those moments, his hand had gone inside Jason's pants. Despite these claims, the case never became a formal criminal accusation. There was no indictment, no charges, and no criminal investigation opened specifically based on Jason Francia's testimony. What happened next was a civil settlement. Jason Francia's mother hired a lawyer and threatened to file a civil lawsuit against Michael Jackson. Once again, Michael Jackson agreed to settle. He paid compensation to Jason Francia and a separate amount to his mother. Many people point to this as evidence of guilt. After all, they argue, an innocent person would have fought the case in court. But Michael Jackson's legal team advised him otherwise. They warned that the legal costs of a trial would be far greater than the settlement itself, and that the media damage could be devastating, especially since the press had already begun treating him as guilty. Years later, Jason Francia testified again during the 2005 trial in the case involving Gavin Arvizo. His testimony was confused and inconsistent, and at times he seemed unsure about the details of his own story. Eventually, he admitted that he originally told investigators that Michael Jackson had only tickled him. He said he changed his story because he felt pressured and just wanted the interrogation to end. 10 years after the Jordan Chandler case, Michael Jackson's life looked very different. He had released the album History in 1995 and Invincible in 2001, both of which sold well. However, Invincible received mixed reviews at the time and only gained broader recognition years later. The truth is that the Michael Jackson mania of the 1980s was no longer the same. Even so, he was still one of the most famous people on the planet, and he continued to appear constantly in the news, especially because of his personal life. In 1996, Michael Jackson married Debbie Rowe, a nurse he had met at the clinic where he was treated for vitiligo. This was his second marriage. 2 years earlier, in 1994, shortly after the civil settlement in the Jordan Chandler case, Michael Jackson had married Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis Presley. That marriage ended in 1996. His marriage to Debbie Rowe also made headlines because she was already 6 months pregnant at the time. From that marriage, which lasted until 1999, Michael Jackson had 2 children, Prince and Paris. In 2002, his third child was born. Nicknamed Blanket, the child was conceived through a surrogate. In 2003, Michael Jackson agreed to participate in a documentary produced by British journalist Martin Bashir. The documentary was titled Living with Michael Jackson. The idea was to show the singer's daily life, his routines, and his relationship with his children. Large portions of the documentary were filmed inside Neverland Ranch, giving the public rare access to Michael Jackson's private world. During the documentary, Michael Jackson made statements that shocked many viewers. At one point, he openly spoke about allowing children to sleep in his bedroom. He insisted that there was nothing sexual about it. According to Michael Jackson, sharing a bed was an act of trust and innocence, something he believed should not automatically be interpreted as wrong. But the way those statements were edited and presented would soon spark a massive public backlash. When Living with Michael Jackson aired on television, the reaction was immediate and intense. Clips from the documentary were replayed endlessly by the media. Headlines focused almost exclusively on Michael Jackson's statements about children sleeping in his bedroom. News outlets and tabloids quickly framed the situation as disturbing and inappropriate. What had been presented by Michael Jackson as an expression of innocence was now being interpreted by much of the public as evidence of something far more serious. The backlash was so strong that authorities in California began paying close attention. Within months, those statements would trigger a brand new criminal investigation. Not long after the documentary was broadcast, new allegations began to surface. At the center of them was a boy named Gavin Arvizo. Gavin had met Michael Jackson several years earlier, after the singer publicly supported him during his battle with cancer. Michael Jackson and his foundation offered help to Gavin and his family, and for a period of time, they maintained close contact. Following the release of the documentary, Gavin Arvizo and his family claimed that Michael Jackson had sexually abused the boy. They alleged that the abuse began after the documentary aired and continued over a series of visits to Neverland Ranch. Once again, Michael Jackson found himself under criminal investigation. But this time, the situation would unfold very differently from what had happened back in 1993. Unlike the case in 1993, this time there would be no civil settlement before a criminal process. Authorities took the accusations seriously from the start and moved quickly. In November of 2003, police officers searched Neverland Ranch once again. This time, the operation was far more extensive. Computers, hard drives, books, magazines, and personal items were all seized as potential evidence. Michael Jackson was arrested shortly afterward and formally charged with multiple criminal offenses. The charges included allegations of sexual abuse of a minor, as well as conspiracy, false imprisonment, and providing alcohol to a child. For the first time in his life, Michael Jackson would face a full criminal trial. The case moved quickly into the public spotlight. Michael Jackson was released on bail, but the legal process that followed would last for months. During that time, both the prosecution and the defense began building their cases. The prosecution argued that Michael Jackson used his fame, wealth, and influence to manipulate and control children and their families. They claimed that Gavin Arvizo had been isolated, intimidated, and prevented from leaving Neverland Ranch. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that the accusations were fabricated. According to Michael Jackson's lawyers, the Arvizo family had a long history of making false claims and attempting to profit from legal disputes. Once again, the battle between two completely opposing narratives had begun. As the trial date approached, the case against Michael Jackson continued to grow in complexity. Prosecutors expanded the list of accusations, adding new charges related to conspiracy and alleged attempts to silence the Arvizo family. According to the prosecution, Michael Jackson and members of his staff had worked together to intimidate Gavin Arvizo and his relatives. They claimed the family had been pressured, monitored, and manipulated after the release of the documentary. The defense strongly rejected those claims. Michael Jackson's lawyers argued that the Arvizo family was free to come and go as they pleased. They pointed out that the family had traveled, spoken to lawyers, and interacted with the outside world during the exact period in which they claimed they were being held captive. Once again, both versions of the story seemed completely incompatible. The trial officially began in January of 2005. It would become one of the most closely watched courtroom cases in American history. More than 140 witnesses were called to testify, including former employees, law enforcement officers, medical professionals, and several high-profile celebrities. The proceedings lasted for almost 5 months. Every detail of the trial was covered extensively by the media, with daily updates coming directly from the courtroom. For Michael Jackson, this was no longer just a legal battle. It had become a public spectacle, with his reputation, his freedom, and his legacy all hanging in the balance. One of the key moments of the trial was the testimony of Gavin Arvizo himself. By the time he took the stand, Gavin was a teenager. He described in detail the moments in which he claimed Michael Jackson had shown him pornographic material and provided him with alcohol. According to his testimony, the abuse had taken place inside Michael Jackson's bedroom at Neverland Ranch. Gavin also claimed that Michael Jackson used coded language and secrecy to allegedly avoid being caught. Throughout his testimony, the prosecution treated Gavin as the central and most important witness in the case. His statements formed the core of the accusations presented to the jury. During cross-examination, the defense focused on inconsistencies in Gavin Arvizo's testimony. Michael Jackson's lawyers questioned the timeline presented by the prosecution and highlighted contradictions between Gavin's statements and earlier interviews given by his family. They also pointed out that Gavin had been exposed to pornographic material before ever meeting Michael Jackson. When asked directly, Gavin admitted that he had seen pornographic magazines and videos in other places, unrelated to Michael Jackson. This contradicted the prosecution's attempt to portray him as completely naive and unfamiliar with sexual content prior to his relationship with the singer. For the defense, this raised serious doubts about the reliability of Gavin's account. The defense also called multiple witnesses to challenge the credibility of the Arvizo family. Several former employees of Neverland Ranch testified, stating that they had never witnessed any inappropriate behavior by Michael Jackson. Some of them described Gavin Arvizo as disruptive and aggressive during his visits. One employee claimed that the boy had damaged property and even threatened her with a knife in the kitchen. Others stated that Gavin and his brother often stayed in Michael Jackson's bedroom, but insisted they never saw the singer give alcohol to the children or behave in a sexual manner. These testimonies directly contradicted key elements of the prosecution's narrative and introduced further doubt into the case. Another important witness for the defense was the flight attendant Cynthia Bell. She testified about a private flight on which Michael Jackson traveled with the Arvizo brothers. According to her testimony, it was her idea to serve wine in soda cans. She explained that Michael Jackson did not like drinking alcohol in front of his children. Cynthia Bell stated clearly that she never saw Michael Jackson share alcohol with Gavin Arvizo. She also described Gavin's behavior during the flight as difficult and demanding. According to her, he constantly asked for things, complained about the food, and showed little respect for the crew. Her testimony was very similar to statements given by other staff members who had contact with the Arvizo family. Another relevant testimony came from Jordan Chandler's mother. She stated that she had not spoken to her son for years. According to her, she never suspected that her son had been abused by Michael Jackson and had never made such an allegation herself. As expected, members of the Arvizo family were also called by the prosecution. Gavin Arvizo reiterated his accusations in court. He claimed that after the documentary Living with Michael Jackson aired on television, the singer began showing pornographic material to him and his brother. He also repeated his allegations of having been sexually abused by Michael Jackson. Gavin's brother, Star Arvizo, gave a testimony that closely mirrored Gavin's version of events. He claimed that he had witnessed Michael Jackson abuse his brother on 2 occasions. Star also alleged that Michael Jackson gave them alcohol, which he referred to as Jesus juice. He further claimed that Michael Jackson would touch himself inappropriately in front of the boys and encourage them to do the same. Throughout the trial, the defense focused heavily on challenging the credibility of the Arvizo family. They brought attention to previous legal disputes in which members of the family had been involved. In those earlier cases, the family had made serious allegations against other individuals, including claims of abuse and wrongdoing. Several of those accusations had eventually been dropped or resolved without any finding of guilt. According to the defense, this established a pattern of behavior. They argued that the Arvizo family had a history of exaggerating or fabricating claims in the context of legal disputes. Their goal was to convince the jury that the accusations against Michael Jackson were not trustworthy and should be viewed with skepticism. The defense also questioned the behavior of Gavin Arvizo throughout the trial itself. Multiple journalists who covered the case noted that Gavin often laughed at inappropriate moments, made faces, and appeared unconcerned with the seriousness of the proceedings. At times, he was seen whispering, smiling, or even falling asleep during testimony. According to the defense, this behavior undermined his credibility and raised further doubts about the reliability of his story. Despite that, Gavin's testimony remained the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Without it, the charges against Michael Jackson would have little to stand on. As the trial moved forward, the defense began systematically dismantling key points of the prosecution's case. One of the turning points came when the credibility of Gavin Arvizo's account was directly challenged using concrete details. During cross-examination, defense attorneys presented a pornographic magazine that Gavin claimed Michael Jackson had shown him. Gavin identified the magazine and confirmed that it was one of the items he said the singer had shared with him and his brother. However, there was a serious problem. The magazine had only been released in August of 2003. By that time, the Arvizo family had already stopped visiting Neverland Ranch more than 5 months earlier. This contradiction significantly weakened Gavin's testimony and raised new doubts about the accuracy of his timeline. The defense continued to weaken the prosecution's case by revisiting earlier statements made by Gavin Arvizo in other legal proceedings. They questioned him about a past lawsuit involving the department store J.C. Penney. During that case, Gavin had testified under oath that his parents never fought. However, under cross-examination in the Michael Jackson trial, Gavin admitted that statement was false. He acknowledged that he had lied to the court at that time. That same J.C. Penney case was also explored through the testimony of Janet Arvizo. She admitted that she had committed perjury. In other words, she admitted that she had lied under oath during that earlier trial. The defense also showed that Janet Arvizo had committed fraud. After receiving financial compensation from J.C. Penney, she failed to report the money in order to continue receiving government assistance. If the trial was already dominating media attention, it intensified even further when Michael Jackson's lawyers began calling their own witnesses. If the trial was already dominating media attention, it intensified even further when Michael Jackson's defense team began calling their witnesses. Among them were several well-known celebrities. One of the most prominent was actor Macaulay Culkin. He testified that he had slept in the same bed as Michael Jackson many times between the ages of 9 and 14. He made it clear that his parents were aware of this and approved of it. Macaulay Culkin stated unequivocally that Michael Jackson had never behaved inappropriately toward him. He also described the allegations that children had been abused by the singer as completely ridiculous. Another witness called by the defense was comedian George Lopez. He testified that he had given money to help Gavin Arvizo during his cancer treatment. However, over time, he began to feel that Gavin's father was more interested in money than in his son's well-being. George Lopez said he started distancing himself from the Arvizo family after Gavin's father accused him of stealing $300 from the boy's wallet. Another comedian who testified was Chris Tucker. He stated that he had given money and gifts to the Arvizo family because he felt sorry for them. But he said that, over time, they began pushing boundaries and attempting to take advantage of him more and more. Chris Tucker also testified that he had warned Michael Jackson to be careful with the family because he believed they were extremely manipulative. The defense also called two men who had spent years visiting Neverland Ranch as children. Both of them had already given interviews in the past defending Michael Jackson, including during the Jordan Chandler case. One of them was Brett Barnes. He testified that he had shared a bed with Michael Jackson at least 10 times. According to Brett Barnes, nothing inappropriate had ever happened. He also expressed frustration with people who claimed to have witnessed abuse, saying they were damaging his reputation and spreading stories that were not true. The other former child visitor was Wade Robson. He testified that he went to Neverland Ranch many times and that he almost always slept in Michael Jackson's bedroom. According to Wade, everything that happened there involved video games, movies, and pillow fights. Another defense witness was Asja Pryor, who at the time was Chris Tucker's girlfriend. She testified that Janet Arvizo and her children seemed overly excited about the idea of traveling to Brazil for Carnival. She also stated that Janet Arvizo had even invited her to go along on the trip. Additional witnesses testified that during the period in which the Arvizos claimed they were being held prisoner by Michael Jackson, the family actually moved around freely. They went shopping, visited their lawyer, handled personal matters, and even spent several days at the home of Janet Arvizo's boyfriend. One final testimony worth mentioning came from attorney Mark Geragos. He had represented Michael Jackson up until a few months before the trial. Mark Geragos testified that after watching the documentary, he hired a private investigator to look into the Arvizo family. According to him, he had the impression that they were planning to extort his client. Everything involving Michael Jackson generated public interest. So when the first case involving Jordan Chandler came to light, tabloids immediately jumped on the story, and the situation quickly turned into a media circus. The headlines were sensationalist and almost always treated Michael Jackson as guilty, even when the articles themselves presented no real evidence. Newspapers published anything they could get their hands on, including confidential information from the investigation. On top of that, several former employees of the singer sold stories to the press, many of whom had never even set foot in Neverland Ranch. they claimed to have witnessed sexual abuse inside the property. One example involved a couple who demanded $100,000 in exchange for saying that Michael Jackson had touched a young man inappropriately. Later, it was discovered that the same couple had initially asked for $500,000 to claim that the singer had put his hand inside the young man's pants. And this kind of behavior did not stop after 1993. Among all the figures involved in the media coverage, one journalist stood out: Diane Dimond. At the time, she worked for a television program called Hard Copy. For years, Diane Dimond dedicated herself to trying to prove that Michael Jackson was guilty. In 1993, she was one of the first journalists to report on the Jordan Chandler case. At one point, she publicly claimed that she possessed shocking documents related to the investigation, which supposedly mentioned actor Macaulay Culkin. However, those documents actually showed the opposite. They showed that Macaulay Culkin had denied ever being abused by Michael Jackson. There was nothing incriminating in them. Later, Diane Dimond also interviewed a man named Victor Gutierrez. He claimed to have a video that showed Michael Jackson sexually abusing his own nephew. Diane Dimond repeated this claim in other interviews. Eventually, it was revealed that the video never existed. It had been completely fabricated by Victor Gutierrez. In 1996, Gutierrez went on to publish a book titled Michael Jackson Was My Lover. The book was allegedly based on a secret diary said to belong to Jordan Chandler. But there was one major problem. That so-called diary never existed. Jordan Chandler later stated that he never kept any diary and that he had absolutely nothing to do with the book, which he described as pure fiction. But let's go back to journalist Diane Dimond. During the Gavin Arvizo case, she led the reporting team of a television network specialized in crime-related programs. At the same time, she was also writing a book about her 10-year involvement with the investigations into allegations of child sexual abuse against Michael Jackson. She clearly knew how to capitalize on the situation. Still during the Gavin Arvizo case, she gave an interview claiming that there were many love letters that Michael Jackson had supposedly written to the boy. She admitted that she had never actually seen the letters, but said she knew they existed based on information from a reliable source. The truth is that those letters, along with many other claims published by the media, were never produced. They never appeared as evidence in court. At the end of 2009, just a few months after Michael Jackson's death, a book titled The Official Michael Jackson Opus was released as a tribute to the singer. In that book, choreographer Wade Robson wrote a text that included the following passage: Michael Jackson changed the world, and more personally, my life forever. He is the reason I dance, the reason I make music, and one of the main reasons I believe in the pure goodness of humanity. He has been a great friend of mine for 20 years. His music, his personal words of inspiration and encouragement, and his unconditional love will live inside me forever. I will miss him immensely, but I know he is now at peace, enchanting the heavens with a melody and a moonwalk. At the time, no one found those words exaggerated. After all, Wade Robson had known Michael Jackson since he was 5 years old, and the singer had been a very strong presence in his life. Wade had also testified in defense of Michael Jackson in both sexual abuse cases. But after Michael Jackson's death, things would begin to change. After Michael Jackson's death, things began to change. In 2013, Wade Robson filed a lawsuit against Michael Jackson's estate. In the lawsuit, he claimed that he had been sexually abused by the singer over the course of several years during his childhood. And it is almost impossible to think about Wade Robson without also thinking about James Safechuck. Not only because James is the other person who tells his story in the documentary Leaving Neverland, but also because the two stories share many similarities. Like Wade, James Safechuck had previously defended Michael Jackson. During the Jordan Chandler case, he publicly stated that he had never been abused by the singer. However, during the Gavin Arvizo trial, James chose not to testify, even though his name appeared on a list of potential victims. In 2014, everything changed. James Safechuck also filed a lawsuit, claiming that he had been sexually abused by Michael Jackson from the age of 10 until the age of 14. So, just as we did with the other cases, let's first take a closer look at James Safechuck's story. In early 1987, a Pepsi commercial featuring Michael Jackson went on the air and became famous all over the world. And it was on the set of that commercial that James Safechuck, only 9 years old at the time, met Michael Jackson. The same question people asked when Wade Robson filed his lawsuit was also asked when James Safechuck followed the same path. What made him change his mind? What we understand is that James began feeling the consequences of his relationship with Michael Jackson earlier than Wade did. That could explain why James did not appear in court in 2005 to testify in Michael Jackson's defense. Around that time, James reportedly had a conversation with his mother in which he suggested that Michael Jackson was not a good person and that something bad had happened between them. Just like with Wade, the process of James recognizing the abuse was slow and gradual. It intensified after he became a father in 2010. According to James, becoming a parent made him realize how innocent children are, and it triggered deep fears within himself. He said he feared developing inappropriate impulses, which led him to question his own mental health. But when did James truly understand that what happened to him was sexual abuse? That realization came later. After the release of the documentary Leaving Neverland, Oprah Winfrey hosted a special program about the film. During that interview, James stated that he only fully understood that he had been abused by Michael Jackson after he'd learned about Wade Robson's story back in 2013. He said that during that period, he could barely sleep and spent his days overwhelmed with anger toward himself, without fully understanding why. When he heard Wade's story, he began to think that what he had experienced with Michael Jackson might be the reason he felt that way. In one of his testimonies to the court, James said he also needed the help of a therapist to understand that he had indeed been sexually abused. He stated that he suffers from depression, panic disorder, and post-traumatic stress. At one point, he said, "I still feel like it was my fault." James Safechuck alleges that the abuse began in 1988, while he and his mother were accompanying Michael Jackson during the Bad Tour. According to him, while they were in Paris, Michael Jackson taught him how to masturbate, telling him that it was something everyone did and that the boy would enjoy it. James claims that from that moment on, the sexual contact increased both in frequency and intensity. He says he was abused hundreds of times. According to his account, Michael Jackson would touch his body and encourage him to touch himself, with the behavior becoming increasingly explicit over time. James also claims that on some occasions, Michael Jackson rewarded him for this behavior with gifts, most often jewelry. At one point, James says, "I liked the jewelry, and I liked it when I was a kid, and something I liked was used against me." One specific detail James mentions involves a piece of jewelry. He claims that his relationship with Michael Jackson became so intense that the two even symbolically got married. He says they held a secret wedding ceremony in Michael Jackson's bedroom, performed prayers together, and that only the two of them knew it had happened. The ceremony had no legal validity, but James says he was given a ring, which he describes as an engagement ring. He says that remembering that ring today is extremely difficult for him. As he grew older, James says he began questioning his own sexuality. At the same time, he says he developed a crush on a singer who was part of the Bad Tour, named Shirley Crowell. According to James, Michael Jackson reacted negatively to this. He claims that Michael showed him photos of Shirley Crowell without makeup, telling him to look at how ugly she was. James also described Michael Jackson's bedroom in a way similar to what had been mentioned in the Jordan Chandler case. According to him, the bedroom was heavily protected, with alarm systems that made noise if someone approached. He claims there was also a closet that could only be accessed with a secret code. James further alleges that Michael Jackson would conduct drills with him. In these drills, James had to learn how to put his clothes on quickly and leave the room without making noise, as if someone were about to enter. He says that sometimes Michael Jackson would deliberately mess up another bedroom so that staff members would believe James had slept there and not in Michael's room. According to James, all of this was done to avoid raising suspicion. Just like Wade Robson, James claims that Michael Jackson repeatedly told him never to tell anyone about what was happening between them. He says these warnings often sounded like threats. James stated that Michael Jackson told him repeatedly that if anyone ever found out, his life would be destroyed, and Michael's life would be destroyed as well. James describes it as a secret that was reinforced again and again. Like Wade, James claims that Michael Jackson began losing interest in him as he grew older. According to his account, the abuse stopped when he was 14 years old. As with Wade Robson's case, the similarities between their stories also became a central argument for the defense. Michael Jackson's legal team argued that there was no reason for these allegations to be accepted by the court. According to Michael Jackson's legal team, James Safechuck filed his claims 5 years after the singer's death and more than 20 years after the alleged abuse had taken place. They also pointed out that James had previously stated on multiple occasions that Michael Jackson had never abused him. Just as we saw in Wade Robson's case, the legal process involving James Safechuck followed a very similar path. That included the same attorney representing both men. In fact, James's first legal move in 2014 was not to file an entirely separate lawsuit, but to add his name and allegations to Wade Robson's ongoing case. Like Wade, James also needed to explain why it had taken so long for him to come forward. One important legal detail is that statutes of limitations can be suspended if the alleged perpetrator actively prevented the victim from reporting the abuse. James claimed that Michael Jackson called his home once or twice a year, reinforcing the idea that he should never tell anyone what had happened between them. According to James, those phone calls often carried an intimidating tone, which he says contributed to his long delay in speaking out. James Safechuck also filed lawsuits against Michael Jackson's companies, including MJJ Productions and MJJ Ventures. He followed a similar argument to Wade Robson's, alleging that the companies had been created to facilitate access to children. However, James's case did not advance as far. Unlike Wade, James Safechuck was never formally employed by any of those companies. And although he claimed to have danced on stage with Michael Jackson during the Bad Tour, the court ruled that this did not qualify him as an employee. Ultimately, his case was dismissed for reasons similar to those in Wade Robson's lawsuit. The judge also ruled that because Michael Jackson controlled the companies, and not the other way around, they could not be held responsible for his personal conduct. Just like in Wade Robson's case, James Safechuck's lawsuit did not result in any verdict of guilt or innocence, and at this point, it becomes clear that the story of Michael Jackson goes far beyond court verdicts and legal filings. Even after investigations, trials, and dismissed cases, the questions never fully disappeared. New accusations emerged years later. Contradictions surfaced, and public opinion remained deeply divided. What began in the 1990s never truly came to an end. And if up to this point we have examined the cases, the courts, and the legal outcomes, what comes next goes even further. Because this story does not end here. In the next part, we will move beyond the courtroom. We will examine the aftermath, the media reaction, the documentaries, and the impact these accusations had on Michael Jackson's legacy and on public perception. Part 2 will be released tomorrow at 2 p.m. right here on this channel. Thank you for following our channel. Every week, we will bring you the most famous crimes in the world. Like this video, share and follow our channel,